Hey guys, Le Mans Ultimate has brought out a new update just 2 days ago, and we are going to go through this update together in a real quick video. We review the changelog. We will do some driving, of course, and I will tell you a bit how it compares to the likes of iRacing, ACC, and Automobilista for you to understand where the game stacks up and how it feels. There have been some changes to the tires that we should hopefully note, and I will talk you through something that I kind of still find to be an issue, so stay tuned until the end. Let's start with the changelog. There's a lot of small things that they changed, but of course, for us on this channel in particular, we are going to be all about the driving physics changes. Let's go through it so real quick. The replay mode has been added. I didn't really take a look at it because I feel this is not a feature that should be something we need to assess. It just needs to work. So I'm just hoping this is going to do its thing. And if it doesn't do it now, it will soon do in the future. It's just kind of stuff that needs to be in any sim. So we're not questioning that. A good improvement is probably having the radar natively in the game now, so we don't need to rely on third-party apps that are somehow an overlay, and then the Ultimate is not your top window. So having it in the game from the start is probably the best solution, and it is now there. I already saw it with the AI. Seems to work. Very good stuff. Some changes to the race start, so just a couple of bug fixes. Maybe what's new is that we have CDA setups in there right away, made by your caster, if I got this right, who's a kind of former RF2 professionals, mainly on Rennsport these days. But since Rennsport kind of lends the code from the likes of rFactor 2, kind of makes sense that he does the setups. Then going further, there's a bit of changes to netcode. Let's hope it's improvements. Content added, fixes, blah, blah, blah. Not important. What we look into is physics changes, and there has been something done to the front wing stall. I wish, though, the details here were a bit more in the physics department and what they changed. Not that they touched something, but how and how it changed. But we're not getting that. It's the same for the tire slip curve, apparently. But there's a bit more detail down here. So the tires on the hypercars, they have a bit more detail added now. There's a bit different ways in how they respond, and this is mainly what we're going to look into the video. The other changes that the LMP2 and GTE class, which formerly did not have, or previously did not have the newest tire from Studio 397, were now also updated to their latest iteration, kind of the tire model, if you want to call it that way. So we need to have a look at the GTEs as well, which in the old version kind of showed a bit too much of the shopping trolley behavior that we had in some of the videos and streams, which is kind of similar to what Rennsport had in the past, which now still I didn't play for a while. So we're going to look into the GTEs and the hypercars and what is different with the tires, and then last part in the video is going to be what still bugs me about the game. Before we can get into the driving, let's quickly get an understanding of how all the racing games really differ. And the main thing here is how they generate grip, how they lose grip, how they regain grip. This is how all the games really differ. And this is the only thing really why they feel different at the end of the day. And the second part in that is how the games deliver information about what the car is doing underneath to the driver. And there are different approaches to force feedback. Some games exclusively kind of try to mimic what the real life steering wheel would do. And I can tell you that a lot of sim racers would be extremely disappointed of the force feedback in real cars because it's extremely dull, extremely low sometimes, and doesn't deliver any useful information outside of oversteer. Everything the real driver feels is through the forces that are acting on the car, some vibrations on the tire, maybe something on the brake pedal or so, but you don't actually have too much in the steering wheel in real cars, especially when they have power steering. Then there is the different approach where you say, well, in the sim, you don't have these things like the forces from the car acting on the driver's body, telling you through the spine and your senses what the car is doing. So you are kind of stripped of this information in the sim. And therefore, we give you this information through other means, which are force feedback. So adding effects to the force feedback that are not naturally there, but they kind of make sense and deliver information to the driver that you can act upon and be kind of more or smarter about the car and have better insight. The other thing would be through sound, for example, and tire sound in particular, where you get a lot of information about how much you're using the tire, if you're overusing it, if it's locking up, if it's regaining the grip. And this is the things that you can do as a sim developer to deliver information to the driver that is not there in the real car, but is there in the real car through just feeling it through your body, which we don't have in the sim and needs to be replaced. And these are kind of fundamentally opposing approaches to we want to give you the real life experience as close as we can versus we want to give you all the information that is there in real life, but because we're in a sim, we have to give it to you through other means. And R-Factor, Le Mans Ultimate is still on one side of the spectrum, whereas I feel other games are on the other side. So we're going to talk about this now. Let's start by quickly reconsidering what the other games are really doing in terms of that. If you are familiar with iRacing, and if you're not, then this is how it works. In iRacing, there is a very clear grip peak on the top of the grip slip curve, and the peak is very small. In iRacing, though, you have a very long way to go to that peak, so there is a lot of grip available if you know how to extract it. And how you extract it in iRacing is by loading up the tire slowly, by being careful, by never overwhelming it too quickly, by adding steering and brake or removing brake throughout the braking zone slowly, carefully, and always very close to that grip peak, which is the result of the combined grip you're asking laterally, say cornering, or longitudinally, say accelerating and braking. And in iRacing, the build up to that peak is what kind of freaks people out to start with a game, because it's a long time until you're really at the peak. And just really developing a feeling for this peak and how you combine your inputs to actually extract the maximum of the tire, this is the crucial bit that is difficult in iRacing. And so to say, in every corner, there is a perfect pattern for going into the brake smoothly, going out of the brake as you increase the steering angle, and kind of repeating this pattern in as smooth of a fashion as you can is going to produce more lap time. Because as you produce more grip, the car is going to rotate faster. And iRacing is probably the game where the trail braking is most pronounced in giving the car rotation and ultimately lap time. Moving on to other games, though, like ACC. Oh, wait, one thing about iRacing that we forgot is that once you reach that peak, it is really just a point. And if you go over that peak, the grip is gone entirely and is not going to ever come back to you, which means you understeer out of the corner or you spin. We're probably exaggerating here, is not that sharp as I've just shown it, but it's much sharper than in any of the other games. So this is the difference that you feel in iRacing. Long build up towards the peak of grip, quickly a quick drop of grip over the limit of the tire, and that is what makes iRacing rather tricky to drive. The difference then to other games is, and let's take ACC as an example, is that in ACC you do not have to do this build up that grip as smoothly. You can just smash the brake aggressively and the grip is going to be there. The tire is going to deliver. That's why you can smash the brake on ACC, and that's why you need to be into the brake also a little smoother in iRacing, which is also why in iRacing many people run dampers on their brakes so they're not pressing the brake too quickly, for example. Same on the throttle pedal. In iRacing, you want to progress into the throttle, and that's why a damper on the throttle pedal sometimes is good on iRacing, but is horrific for ACC because you need to be very quick with the inputs in return. So when in ACC you slam the brake, the tire is going to deliver. You can add some steering to that, and then when you do the trail braking, it will add tiny amounts of grip, but you are not having this extremely long slope towards the grip peak as you have in iRacing. It is much easier to go to the limit of grip in ACC. I'd say you can add a tiny bit with the trail braking, right? And you can be precise around that point. And there is a difference between the ultimate peak and kind of the wider peak. But for the majority of people, they will easily be in that wider peak in ACC, and just the very ultimate tiny bit of extra bit, that's what the pro drivers are going to extract, but it's not as difficult or as hard to extract as in iRacing. It's not as brutal of a build up. There's not a huge amount of range of different grip levels, so to say. And the other bit is what happens after the peak in ACC is not the sharp drop off as you have it in iRacing. It's probably just dropping to a plateau, and which, well, it's hard to say, but or hard to show. It's a bit of a plateau. You lose a bit of grip, but it's never fully gone, so to say, until you have insane slide and slip angles. So there's much more tolerance in ACC in regards to that. Then now we could probably talk about all the other games as well, but I feel now R-Factor and Rennsport and Le Mans Ultimate and Automobilista, they all go into a similar direction where you do some trail braking, but it's not adding the same amount of grip as it does in iRacing, for example. On the other hand, the trail braking in the Mans Ultimate, for example, this is really sensitive, especially because we run high downforce, rather fast cars. And initially, when you go into the braking zone, we're going to have a couple tons pressing the car down into the ground. So you can be really aggressive on the brake initially, much like ACC, but you have to trail brake along your reduction of speed because you lose so much downforce. And then additionally, once you add the steering, there is very little extra grip available in terms of trail braking. And also you will hardly notice the changes in the amount of rotation when you're getting it just right. And therefore I find it also difficult in the Mans Ultimate, for example, to really find that extra bit on the limit, because it's just not as pronounced as it is in iRacing. And also it's just not as wide of a range, so to say, in ACC where you have the optimum grip. And I feel the game is a bit more vague, but I think this is something we can better see during the driving. I hope this quick summary gives you an idea why the games are different and what you do different as a driver. And now we're going to look at what Le Mans Ultimate actually does now. In this patch, they also added the new BMW V8 Hybrid, so we're in this car now in the ARC livery. Since we're in the cockpit, nothing of that really matters, but we're starting with that car. Before we can really say anything about the tires, we need to get them up to temperature, because before that, they're just not producing any meaningful amounts of grip, and any verdict we do needs to be on properly warm tires. So I'll do a couple laps and be right back. Alright guys, I've warmed up the tires, and while we drive along, we have to make a few separations of what we're actually going to look at. We will have the fast corners that we can talk about, we have the slow corners we can talk about, and we have the braking we can talk about. And I want to also already kind of give an idea where the game stacks up, so you have a better idea what to look out for while I drive now. How the game stacks up between iRacing and ACC, so to say. In terms of grip buildup, you don't have to be as careful as in iRacing. The grip is going to be right there, and as I already said, initial braking you can be very harsh. The tire will be able to convert. Then, as you go into the corner, the trail braking is really sensitive. So this again is a bit more on the iRacing side, though the car will not rotate infinitely much more like it does in iRacing when you add the combined grip between steering and braking. This is so subtle, the amount of extra rotation you get, that it is really hard to see, and I doubt you're going to see it in the video at all. So what I want you to look out for is, does the trailing that I do actually increase the amount of rotation I'm getting, or does it not do that? And the tendency is going to be you won't be able to see that. I tap the brake and the car just rotates the same amount. Then what you'll also see is that when I go through the corners, especially the fast corners, I can go through the corner with 20 degrees of steering, and I can go through the corner with 30 or 40 degrees of steering, and the car is largely going to rotate the same amount, but there won't be any indication in the steering wheel if I'm overusing the tire. There won't be anything acoustically if I'm overusing the tire. The only representation of how much we're using the tire that we are going to get is from the tire widget heating up the tire. And while in fast corners, the force feedback increases a lot with the speed, which is nice. So you have a really crisp and strong wheel in the fast corners, so you can be really precise and not accidentally turn too much because the resistance really is large, especially on the direct drive. In the slow corners, however, there is zero difference, I feel, from kind of 0 kilometers in the corner to, let's say, 100 kilometers in the corner. The weight of the steering wheel, the resistance is largely the same. So it's like between 0 and 100, the steering forces, they don't really scale. They're just the same. And then from, let's say, 150 to 300, they go up a lot, where you get ever more idea of how much the car can take, how much grip there is, how much you can steer. And I feel in ACC, this is much more from 0 to top speed, much more linear, that the steering forces increase and you are much less in doubt and you have a better feedback mechanism. And I feel this is missing here a bit in the slow speed in particular. But let's get to some driving. So it's the braking, the cornering, the steering angles. Let's just do it. So approaching turn 1 then, initially I can be really harsh on the brake, almost maximum, but then the slower I get, the less I can use the brake, because else I will get a massive lockup. And similar to what I already told you just now with the kind of a vagueness in the steering wheel in slow speed, like here through Eau Rouge, there's a lot of force and I might even get some force feedback clipping because it's really harsh. Going over the top of Eau Rouge, I get a bit of a bump there as I go over the curb. All good. Here it self-centers as well on the straight now. In this car, it's not, I think, doing this in all cars in the game. But here now already I'm overshooting the corner a bit, just tiny bit deep there, because I didn't dare the braking. And I'm always a bit puzzled about the braking in the game because I don't really have a feedback mechanism as to how much I'm braking. As I told you, I don't really see that braking adds rotation to the car, so I can't really judge by the horizon moving around me if the amount of braking I do is correct. Then I also don't hear the tires as I drive along, so I kind of also can't judge if my braking is correct. And the other bit is, if I lock up, the only thing I get is the tire on the widget turns red and I get some smoke in the mirror. So there's a good amount of kind of cluelessness because I'm not getting the feedback from the game that kind of I'm seeking because it's available in other games like ACC or iRacing, for example, where the tire noise is a huge factor in how we judge what the car is doing and how the game is communicating to us how much we are using the tire, how much grip is available, or if we are very close to the limit. And this is completely, I feel, missing here in Le Mans Ultimate so far, that there's no feedback mechanism in terms of audio as to how much tire we're using. And there's not really a feedback mechanism, especially in terms of lockups in the force feedback, for example, which I feel we also get in the other games to some degree, but I feel the audio part of that is also much more important. Then let's go up Eau Rouge here because I need time to think. I mean, you can see I can get around the track and there's a good amount of information available and all that, but I never feel confident in the car. So let's slow it down here a bit and go into a high gear so we don't have as much engine noise, and just crank the wheel. And I kind of need to do maximum steering angle to get any feedback from the tires acoustically, for example, right? And also the force feedback doesn't change in all going through the entire steering range. Let's do it again. There's a bit of scrubbing. But there's no quality to this noise, right? It's just the noise, which just kind of loops, but there's no loud and silent to it. There's no volume to it that increases with the amount of scrubbing that we do. So kind of the scrubbing can't tell me if or how much I'm using the tire. It's just on or off, so to say. And if you go to iRacing, this noise scales a lot with how much you're using a tire. And it's the same in ACC, where this tire scrubbing noise is telling you a lot about how much you're using the tire. And here in the Ultimate, let me do this again. There's just this one scrubbing noise, and then there's this overdone noise, right? And it's the same under braking where you just can't hear it. Let me try. Maybe the car is still driving and we can try it in the next corner. I'll just slam the brake in a high gear, so we're only hearing the tires. Well, let's get around here. Only once you lock up, you get the sound from the game. But on your approach to locking up, when the tires start slipping a bit, when it starts spinning slower than what the speed the car is actually driving or moving around in the world, you are not really getting the feedback mechanism there. It's only once it's too late, really, that you get the sound from the game. And I get all that. The real driver also probably can't hear his tires because a race car is freaking loud, and it all makes sense. But as I said earlier, it's a kind of a matter of approach. And if you want to do a sim to be a sim, or if you want to give people the option to get in control of a car, even if you have to add means to the game that are not necessarily one-to-one realistic as in real life. But I want to show you something else, and therefore we need to change the car. Alright guys, I have now swapped to the Ferrari LMDh because the regeneration on this car is kind of special, because it really has audio clues to it. And since this is connected to how much you're braking, you have a very good representation of how much you're braking through the regeneration noise of the car. I've already done a lap, warmed up the tires, so let me show you what I mean. Approaching corner 1, then you see the battery is almost empty, and as we hit the brake, we get this whining noise. And the good thing about that is this whining noise will scale with the amount we're braking, and it will also scale with the amount we're locking up the tires, because once the tire is not spinning anymore, no energy is being generated by the regenerator. So as we go for the corner now, you can kind of hear the lockup when the regeneration noise suddenly starts changing. So in a way, the Ferrari has the kind of unique way of getting across more information to the driver about what the tires are doing through the regeneration noise on the braking. And this is why I urge you to kind of, when you play the game, just take any of the other LMDHs where you don't have this noise, perhaps the BMW, and then you'll probably feel the same lack of confidence into the corners, on the brake in particular, with the trail braking. And then you go to the Ferrari, and what my experience is, and I think it's going to be exactly the same for you, is that you're suddenly going to feel much more confident with the car, simply because it offers that additional feedback mechanism that the other cars don't have. I don't know if some of the other cars potentially have it. I haven't driven them all, or at least I don't remember what the noise level was, but it struck me when I was playing the game now again and trying to just feel what is it that is making it harder for me, and what is making it easier for me here in the Ferrari. That just kind of relying on this noise, I have a lot of information available about the braking, and now I can just drive the car without, well, any or major lockups, because it's talking to me, right? And I don't have to worry about the widget, and I'm not puzzled by what the car is doing, and I can just kind of push and have much more confidence on the brake. And this also makes the entire experience of the game better, because I'm much less freaked out or, yeah, kind of left in the dark about what the car is doing. This felt a bit weird right now in Eau Rouge. There was a wild slide. I'm not sure we should survive that, but we did. And now let's, from the braking, move on a bit to the other stuff, where I say I go in the corner, we can do this much steering or this much steering, and it's not going to make much of a difference. And the only feedback you get is in the tire widget by looking at the surface temperatures. So this is normal. I can just turn more, nothing changes except that the tire develops more heat. So there's really no change in terms of rotation what I do with the steering. No change in terms of rotation when I add more braking in the corner. So it's roll, brake, 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 brake. Nothing changes in terms of rotation, which if you do the same in iRacing is going to have a massive impact on how the car behaves. Let's do it again. Nothing happens, right? The car simply does not respond in terms of how it rotates through the corner. The grip on the tires is already saturated, and you can't just add more grip by trail brake, right? And that is one of the differences that you have to iRacing, one of the differences you have to ACC. And the other bit is that it's always this kind of bit of a, yeah, you're just left in the dark about how much you're actually doing from the tire. I can go through here, no steering at all. I can steer a bit more. It's not going to rotate more, just that the tire generates the heat. And I found myself when driving this game often just checking the tire widget to figure out if I'm pushing too hard or not, and this through this way kind of conserving the tires a little longer. But I'm solely working with kind of the surface temperature of the tire there as to how much I'm using it. And I feel this is not something you can do in real life. It's also not very practical to permanently look at the bottom of your screen. So what I personally would prefer is if there was a certain audio level, a certain quality to the audio level of the tires, giving you a better idea of how much you're using them, even if this is not necessarily realistic and what real drivers do in the car. But again, they also have the forces available that we don't have in the simulator, so we just have to find and use different information to know what the car below us is doing. But I feel the more information is available, it also will change the perception of the game and how you judge the grip and how you judge how you lose grip and regain grip, simply because you're not as much left without information. That I think is the crucial bit. Suddenly the game can feel grippy when you know that you're in the grippy range, but right now the game isn't really telling me, and all I can do is really look at the horizon, perceive the rotation of the car, and kind of figure out if it's increasing if I steer more, or if it's increasing if I brake more. In this way, find out if I'm approaching the limit. And mostly though, in this game, it's only going to be about the exact speed you carry through a corner, because as I said, there's hardly more grip to create with trail braking. There's hardly more rotation to create with simply steering more. And then it is all about just doing the laps and getting a feeling for the rotation with the horizon around you, instead of having any audio or force feedback clues. But I agree kind of with the force feedback. It's not necessary to have that as long as other ways are available. But right now in the cars in the game, it is only the Ferrari, I'd say, that gives you good information about the braking kind of unintentionally, by tying the braking and tire slip and everything to the noise of the energy regeneration in the car. And I would wish for them in the future to add better ways, or just crank up the audio level again of the tires or something, give it some quality to it so you can really hear better how you're using the tires. And I feel it would make it much more intuitive for everyone picking up the game to know where the limit of the game is. Because especially with these difficult high-speed cars, I think if you're starting with sim racing or if you're coming from another game, it is really just tricky finding the limits if you're left so much in the dark. Because I think once you're able to extract the information, the driving really is good. Okay? I'm not a particular fan of this vagueness still with the speed and steering, with just a tire temperature building, that they don't have this grip point like iRacing has, this grip not a plateau, but more of a bigger range that ACC have. They have like a flat line on top of that slip curve, followed by a sharp drop if you overdo it, whereas ACC has a bit of a kind of wider peak, followed by a bit of a grip drop off, but still grip left available. And this is, I feel, how all these cars or all these games differ. I will just try once now to kind of go over the limit, give you an idea how the car responds there. Therefore, we turn down the traction control a bit. Just to do this on exit a bit, because I think without turning off the TT, it's going to be difficult to actually get the car to spin or something. You'd have to be really aggressive. See, the lockup has a direct noise correlation with the regenerator, and this is so good, and you get so much information from that. See, here's a bit of sliding, but it's very snappy. You have to correct really quickly, and it's kind of not nicely controllable, okay? Which I think on these cars is realistic, but there's still a good amount of sliding that you can do before it goes wrong, but then it really goes wrong, okay? So overall, I think this is fine, but perhaps the angles are still a bit wide. I'm not entirely sure. This is this vagueness that I still have with the game, but I think the more time you spend with it, the more clearer it becomes to you, and the less you push into that vagueness. But yeah, here, this is a bit... Right, this is kind of a way to slide a prototype car that I find weird still. Not entirely sure it would behave like that. I would expect it to be snappier, but I think we're talking about cases that are rather rare during the actual driving. So I'm fairly sure this is an improvement, but it was also the worst on the GTE, so let's take a look at that next. Alright guys, I swapped to the GTE. I've warmed up the tires for 2 laps, so they should be good to go. I reduced the traction control a fair bit to see how the car behaves when it's sliding. This is mainly what we're going to look at now. The braking is pretty much like I said is on the LMDhs, where you have very little representation of the tire slip in the steering wheel. On the brake, you just kind of have to learn the pattern because there's very little information you're getting. Again, you will only have the HUD. There is the purple LEDs in the dash, but they are all only going to light up when it's already too late and you're locking the tire. What we ideally want is a bit of build up towards that point so we can start controlling the car on that limit. And I feel that is missing a bit, but the focus shall be on how the car behaves with the rear sliding, where I feel in the older patch, or just kind of the carry over physics from R-Factor 2, the GTEs had a bit of this shopping trolley behavior, which was really annoying and simply wrong. The cars, when I check onboards, cars just don't behave like that. So it was very weird to drive like that, and there was always more rotation to add, either from steering or throttle or whatever. And I feel, and I hope this is not the case anymore. So let's have a quick look at that. Approaching turn 1, I feel braking points are largely the same. Turns in, okay, onto the power. We have to be a bit careful now with the TC on very low. You can see it's just on 1. The cut is also very low, and the slip angle allowed is fairly high. Sadly, we'll have to cross the entire camel stripe before we get the next corner. Again, there's this vagueness in the steering where you don't really know how much you want to do here, but everything is good controllable, right? You have the feedback visually, so you're not really that puzzled. But the car is a bit... The rear is following the car weirdly, so to say. So if you throw it in, the rear is going to still rotate a tiny bit weirdly, but it's always going to catch itself. It doesn't continuously rotate around you like the rear tires had steering on their own. This, I'd say, is definitely gone. You just have a very sensitive state with the car in trail braking, and opposed to the LMDhs, you do get more rotation in the GTEs when you add brake. So if we brake here a little, the car definitely turns in and comes towards the inside. So again, bit of different car behavior here, so we can perhaps argue if what we kind of observed on the LMDh, that they don't really respond to braking input in terms of how they turn into the corners, is just down to the cars and not a game treat. And here in the GTEs, it's quite a bit different. You need very little braking to get the car to rotate into the corner. Perhaps my brake by is too far to the back, but I think for these yeah, kind of also prototypey cars. 52% is probably not too aggressive on the brakes, so I don't think we're locking the rears actually. And now let's see into the slow speed corners, which are always the most tricky because they give the least information in the steering wheel. And there, I feel I could just steer more and the rear would come around even more. There's still a bit of floatiness in the rear there. The slower the speed becomes, I feel, the more weird the game is. But the faster you go through the corners, I'd say, the more kind of credible it is, the more predictable it is, the more it communicates to you. So the more downforce you have available, I feel with that, also the information you get as driver kind of scales. But the slower you become, I feel the more you just have to practice and rely on the patterns that you learn from the game over time, and can't really drive the car intuitively because it just kind of behaves a bit odd and perhaps it increases rotation out of nowhere a bit, like just off photo. That's okay here. But I feel around and on the limit there is just this movement in the car in every corner. Well, I'm not entirely sure there's actually this much wiggle room in the real car that you have the freedom to choose kind of any angle at which you put the car in the corner, and it's just also just going to be fine. I'm just not sure the real cars would behave like that. I think there should be more of a, okay, there's grip, 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 and then there isn't. And here it feels more like, well, there's never really that grip point, but we can go through the corner and you may just choose the angle at which the car is doing that. So we can slide it a bit around here, or we can just drive it very steady with the car planted, not over or understeery, or we can just go very understeery, just crank the wheel here, and it's also kind of going to work. So I'm not entirely sure why there's so much room there, and maybe also feel that when we give the car on the straight a little flick, right, then I give that impulse, and then the rear just kind of skates a bit there with me until you overdo it, and then you actually spin. And this is the point that I feel is hard to find in the game, where you have this bit of range where it's a bit unclear and it floats a bit and all is fine, and then you have this iRacing style very sudden drop of grip. So to sum it up, essentially, I feel we have a bit of a combination of different behaviors we know from different games. We don't have the long buildup of grip that we have on iRacing. It's more like ACC in that regard. We don't have the grip peak like we have in iRacing. It's more like ACC in that regard, but it's more vague around the peak, I feel. And then after the peak, after that plateau, whatever you want to call it, then the grip drop-off is really sharp, which is more like iRacing again, for example, and less like ACC. And with that, I'll probably leave you to experience it yourself, but I hope I've given you some ideas of what to test, what to feel. In particular, do the thing between any LMDh and the Ferrari, simply because of the regeneration noise, because I think it adds so much feedback that was unintended. But it also shows how much that feedback is really needed, and hopefully in the future, maybe they consider that, add a bit of more variety to the tire sounds, make it louder, or at least give people the option to make it louder, so they get more feedback mechanisms from the game they can work with to really know how they have to drive the car, if they are over, if they are under the limit, so you're guessing around less at the end of the day. And then I think there is a really strong base in this game. We knew that because we knew R factor is good in the physics department, but there's a bit of fine-tuning to do. And the most part, I think, is to give the drivers more feedback, especially in the slow corners, for us to really drive the car closer to the limit more intuitively, rather than just learning the patterns by heart and the speeds by heart and the amount of inputs by heart, and actually work with the car and control it around the limit and the approach to the limit, perhaps slightly over the limit, instead of feeling more like a passenger as I do now. So with that, have a good one. I hope you enjoyed that. There's a like button somewhere if you find it interesting to click it. Subscribe to the channel for more, and check out popometer.io, where you're able to record telemetry for most of the major sims now. We're gonna add another game soon. I'm not telling you which one. And bye.